When I was younger, I used to live in the Dominican Republic with my grandparents on my father's side and his brother. My dad lived in the United States at the time. My uncle and I shared a bedroom. To clarify, I was a 7-year-old girl and my uncle was 9. And to get to it, you had to go through my grandma and grandpa's room. My room also had another door which led to the backyard. As a lot of you might know, parts of the Dominican Republic can be really dangerous, especially at night when the lights go out. Because the country can't afford to always keep electricity running, we have blackouts multiple times a day, every day, and mostly during the nighttime when most people are asleep. So nights here are very, very dark. The door in my bedroom that opened to the backyard always scared me because I could hear everything from outside, and it felt like somebody could burst through the door and abduct me. The door was made of long planks of wood laid vertically next to each other. It was the type of wood that always looks like it's rotting. I think it actually was rotting. I faced my bed towards the door so I could see easily if anyone tried to come through. Every night I would fall asleep from the boredom of staring at that door. My grandpa sympathized with me, and eventually he put a huge vintage wooden dresser in front of one door that he bought off the back of some guy's truck. The dresser was so thick and heavy that I instantly felt safer. It started the very first night. As a habit of looking in that direction as I fall asleep, I was staring at the dresser. It was weird to look in that direction now because it was pitch black. I could no longer see the little beams of moonlight between the cracks of the door, or hear the sounds of the wild animals in the yard, or the late night traffic on the street. I remember it was nearing the season for tropical hurricanes, so some nights I could hear faint sounds of the trees swooshing and the door creaking. Some nights the door was louder, like it was finally breaking down from the pressure of the winds. My grandparents didn't see anything wrong with the door in the morning when I told them I was scared that it might be falling apart. We never thought anything of it after that. A few weeks later, we had a huge storm. While I was trying to sleep, I could hear banging and cracking, and creaking and really loud whoosh and splash and thumps. Naturally, I thought it was just the storm, and so did my uncle. Every night after the storm, we kept hearing similar sounds late at night. It would wake us up. We knew it wasn't the storm anymore, but we would try to be logical and realistic. It was probably the old dresser. It was probably the door because it gets loose off its hinges. It was probably a stray cat scratching its paws on our door because the wood is soft. Cats have weird habits. It was my uncle trying to scare me. It was me trying to scare my uncle. We kept coming up with new excuses every night and blaming each other. All that was kept inside the dresser was blankets, towels, curtains, and various linen for storage, so we never had a reason to look ourselves. The dresser was tall and it had a divider in the middle. The left had shelves where my grandma would fold the towels, and the right half had a hanging rack where she would hang curtains and sheets. Sometimes my grandma would complain that the blankets had dirt on them. She would blame my uncle and me, thinking we were wiping our hands on everything because we were too lazy to wash them. One night, there was a louder than usual thump coming from the direction of the dresser. I woke up in a sudden panic, but my uncle was already wide awake. I immediately thought he was playing games and started yelling at him. My grandpa woke up and came to see what was going on. I told him that my uncle woke me up because he was trying to scare me, but my uncle denied it and said he was woken up by all the noise outside. My grandpa didn't hear anything and told us to stop playing around and go back to sleep. As he started to walk back into his room, we heard another loud thump. My grandpa heard it too. They all got freaked out because that time it sounded like it was coming from inside the dresser. He went to the bathroom and got the oil lamp we keep in there, turned it on and opened the dresser to look. We saw the hanging blankets and curtains move slightly, and right away we saw it. My grandpa quickly stuck his hand in and moved the linen to the side. There was a woman in the dresser, really small and freakishly skinny. There was a big hole on the right side of the cardboard backing of the dresser. It didn't lead to the outside that we could see. The door was still there, but we instantly knew how she got inside from the position she was in when my grandpa opened the dresser. She was standing up with her knees slightly bent, facing towards the hole. Her hand was up and behind the hole, reaching up towards where the frame of the door would be. You could see her whole body, and I still remember what she was wearing. She had a long, flowing, sun-colored shirt that was too small for her. She had a rag on her head, but we could see her rough black hair sticking out through the gaps. I don't remember if she had any shoes, but I think she probably did. She also had a thin rope wrapped around her wrist, all the way up to her elbow on her left hand. She was holding a plastic bag that had one or a few small things in it. When my grandpa moved the blankets out of the way, she panicked, and we heard that she dropped something. It was a couple of nails and screws, the ones that were holding the door planks together. The plank became loose, and she started to push it with her hands. That was the creaking noise we heard. After a few seconds of struggling, she finally pushed the plank down and started to fit her body through the crack in the door. Her head didn't fit right away, and my grandpa reached towards her and grabbed her arm. She bit him. She bit him so hard that she almost ripped off his skin. He was bleeding and she didn't let go until he let go of her first. She rammed her head through the door, and we could see how much it actually hurt her to force her head through it, because it made a very distinct scraping sound, and she screamed. She tripped over her skirt when she reached the other side of the door but started to run. We had an outdoor sink and she got on top of it. She climbed the wall that separated our backyard from the backyard of the people on the other side of the street. The wall was made out of cinder blocks and it was so old and abused that it had a bunch of holes and deformities in it. She used those to climb. While she was climbing, my grandpa ran out of our room, past his bedroom, the living room, and the dining room, and opened the door to the backyard. We followed him, and as we ran by, my grandma woke up. By the time he got the back door open, the woman was more than halfway up the wall. He grabbed a machete kept behind a broken washing machine we had in the yard. Right next to the door, he ran towards her. He swung at her foot, but missed by a few inches. That exact moment, the electricity came back on, so all of the street lights flickered and turned on. We could see her now. She reached the top of the wall and jumped on the other side. My grandpa had followed us to the yard, but didn't get to see what was really happening. She asked, and my grandpa just started swearing and yelling at the woman. We don't have free emergency services in the Dominican Republic, so there wasn't much we could do because we didn't have any money. Nobody was hurt in the end. We went to examine the door and the dresser and tried to figure out how exactly she got in there almost every night. The woman had removed the screws and nails on one of the planks on the door, cut a hole in the dresser, and was staying in it. That woman was in our room almost every night for about 2 months, sleeping just a few feet away from us. We don't know if she ever stepped out of the dresser and walks into the rest of our home. We didn't go back to sleep for the rest of the night. Before the sun was fully risen, my grandpa was nailing down the door from both sides. He bought a sack of cement and covered the door with it from the outside. He also replaced another door on the side of the house which led to the outside. It was in the same condition as my bedroom door. We didn't see that woman again. I'm glad we didn't meet any closer than we had. I've never posted one of these before, but recently my friend brought up this story that I basically repressed, and I figured people on here would be interested. I'm also using the names from The Sweet Life of Zach and Cody, for absolutely no reason at all, but just bear with me. It's 3 a.m., so my brain can't come up with actual names. Before I begin, I will clarify right now that I absolutely never led this kid on. Everybody who knew about it while it was happening will say the same. I'm not a flirty person, and I was very careful not to say or do anything to make this boy believe I was into him. So we were traveling back about 7 years, all the way back to when I was around 14. Makes me feel old. I was at a high school sport event, and it was a Friday night game. I can't remember if it was a football game or a baseball game. All I know is it was the last day of school before spring break. I wasn't super into school spirit. I was kind of an emo kid and a loner for the most part, but my best friend pressured me into going. I reluctantly agreed, and looking back, I wish I didn't. I've known her since I was like 4, so if anyone can convince my stubborn ass to do something, it's 100% her. For the sake of remaining anonymous, we'll call the stalker boy Zach and my guy friend Cody. I had met Zach through my friend Cody. Probably spoke to him for about 3 minutes. Honestly, it was more like an introduction, and I didn't vibe with the way he stared at me, so I went back to all my girlfriends and we continued the night. After I got home, I received a text from Cody saying Zach thought I was pretty and wanted my number, so he gave it to him. I didn't really think much about it. I mean, it's not that I wanted him to have my number, but I was super close with Cody and he was reliable, so he would never give my number to someone if he thought something was off with him. So I wake up the next day, on a Saturday, and everything's fine. Towards the afternoon, I receive a text saying, "Hey, it's Zach. Got your number from Cody." We had small talk, basically. I didn't want to be a jerk, so I'd respond. Mainly because he was friends with Cody, so I didn't want to be rude. After about 45 minutes of texting, he tells me he's leaving for a cruise and was really upset I wasn't coming with. So obviously I asked what he meant, and he said he would miss me and hated to be away from me for a week. I definitely thought it was extremely weird, but I figured it was sarcasm or a joke, so I texted back saying something like, "LOL, we spoke for less than an hour. Think you'll be just fine." And he was like, "Yeah, I guess." From my perspective, I had a lot going on in my life. I was very anxious talking to people, and I suffered from depression, and I had daddy issues. I wasn't somebody who could just be like, "You're weird, block number." I was very shy and just didn't know what to do in the situation, so I will admit I let it go longer than I should have. But but I was 14 and didn't realize who I was dealing with, to be honest. So he's on the cruise, so I didn't hear from him for a week. Then eventually, he gets off the boat and tells me I'm the first person he wanted to text. He said he couldn't stop thinking about me and all the fun things we could have been doing while on the trip. The rest is pretty fuzzy, but all I really remember is Zach kept saying weird stuff like how we'll get married in the future and how we are soulmates. How he's never been so in love with anyone. He became obsessed with me for some reason. If I didn't respond, he would text me every 5 minutes on the dot, asking if I was mad at him until I responded. It was just a very obsessive behavior. I would tell him I'm busy and he'd get upset. He just needed me to text him constantly. One day, I basically told him that he was taking things too far and I was uncomfortable. I said I was sorry if I had somehow led him on, but think of him more as a friend. He definitely didn't like that response. He was making fake Instagrams to harass me, even threatening me because I broke his heart. Calling me all kind of names, like a whore and whatnot. He was just saying anything and everything to try to hurt me. I spent 6 hours apologizing, while he was telling me that I'm a horrible person. I could not get Zach to leave me alone, for months. After that, my friends had to sneak me around campus to avoid Zach. I'd have to cut through buildings and take the long way to steer clear of him. Eventually, after a few months, he stopped harassing me online and I actually thought I was free. Now flash forward to sophomore year, after months of being in chemistry class, I noticed my friend, we'll call him Max, had the same last name as Zach. It's an uncommon last name, so it was like a little light bulb turned on in my brain and I immediately asked if they were related. And he rolled his eyes and said, yeah. I was like, damn. We ended up chatting and apparently I'm not the only girl Zach would harass. Max told me he got sent to another school and was put in therapy for basically being crazy and aggressive. Zach unfortunately was extremely abusive towards Max. I was relieved he was sent away. Max was definitely more relieved he was sent away. It just made sense why the harassment stopped so suddenly. Now we're entering junior year and Max has informed me his brother is enrolled back at our high school. Thankfully I had a heads up, but nothing would prepare me when I actually saw him face to face. I walk into my English class, and guess who's sitting in my damn classroom? If you guess Zach, you get a big gold star. The second we made eye contact, he smiled the creepiest smile I've ever seen. I was so scared I almost shit my own spleen out. Thankfully, he never really spoke to me or harassed me. However, he did spend every class staring at me with that scary smile on his face. As much as I wish I was making this up, unfortunately these are true events that really affected me in high school. When my friend brought it up the other day, it honestly felt like a fever dream. Like, I forgot it was all real. It was hard spending 2 whole years of high school terrified of bumping into him, not knowing what he would do, especially after finding out everything his brother Max went through. Now it's been years since I've had to deal with him. I lived in New Mexico for several years before moving to the Midwest. My friends, Amy and I, both females, would spend many days exploring the remote corners of New Mexico, discovering abandoned ghost towns and enjoying the quiet, desolate beauty of the desert. One afternoon in March 2010, we were traveling from Ruidoso to Albuquerque. Always up for exploring, we took a back road rather than traveling the more direct highway. One leg of our journey had us on NM55. It's a remote, teeny-tiny 2-lane highway. We loved those type of roads, up until that day. This part of New Mexico is flat and desolate desert. You can see for miles, and there is virtually nothing except dirt and rock between towns, and towns can be miles apart. So we were on NM55 going north. After a few minutes, we saw a white pickup truck ahead of us going the same direction. Suddenly, he stopped his truck sideways in the middle of the highway, blocking both lanes. We were about a mile away from him, and as we got closer, we began to get uneasy. I could see no reason for him to do this. We were the only other vehicle out there, and we began wondering if we should turn around rather than come up to him and have to stop. We were about half a mile away from him when he pulled over to the opposite side of the highway, but his truck was still pointed in the direction we were going. We tried to relax a little. Surely, this guy was a rancher or something. Maybe he was checking something on his lands. As we passed him, we noticed a few things. One, there was only one person in the truck. A middle-aged guy who never took his eyes off us, and 2, he was talking into a walkie-talkie. A few seconds after we passed him, he pulled back onto the highway and started following us, but he never got too close. He would get to within a few car lengths and then drop back a little, and then speed up again to within a few car lengths. We were getting nervous. We realized how alone we really were. We had seen no other traffic on that road, and we hadn't told anyone about our great idea to take this detour. We checked our cell phones, and neither one of us had signal. typical for remote New Mexico, but scary given our present situation. Amy was driving and speeding up while I was frantically checking the map, hoping to find a road that would have more traffic. There was no other road. We had to travel this one to get to the next town, Mountain Air. Turning around to go back the other way didn't seem like a good option. After a few minutes, we saw another pickup truck coming towards us. It was going very, very slowly, maybe 20 miles per hour if that. This pickup was old and beat up, whereas the one behind us was newer. Amy had us up to 75 miles per hour, which wasn't typical for us on these 55 mile per hour highways, and so we blew by the old pickup. As we passed it, we saw that it was another middle-aged guy, and he was talking to a walkie-talkie. After the white pickup passed him, he pulled a U-turn and pulled in behind it. As we watched all of this, we could see the white pickup truck guy talking to his walkie-talkie. No doubt these two knew each other. We were being deliberately followed. And for the first and only time in my life, I felt hunted. They stayed right behind us. We watched for obstacles in the road, and we truly thought old beat-up pickup guy had set up a trap in the road and our vehicle would be disabled somehow. We talked about driving to the fields. We were in an SUV, but this was obviously their territory and we were afraid of what would happen if we went off-road and got cornered, so we stayed on the highway. By now, the white pickup truck guy was right on top of us. We could see him talking to the walkie-talkie, yet he stayed right up on our bumper. And the old beat-up pickup truck guy was right on top of him. The three of us sped down the highway. The white pickup inched closer. His maneuvering and edging closer made it apparent that he was trying to bump us. I watched helplessly as he got to within inches of our back bumper. Amy floored it. We were passing 80 miles per hour and edging up to 90 miles per hour. The road was flat and deserted, but any little thing going wrong would have been catastrophic. We were absolutely not going to slow down or stop if we could help it. The white pickup pulled onto the opposite lane and started to gain speed. The only thing we could think of was that he wanted to pass us and get in front of us. If he got in front of us and his buddy was behind us, then we'd be boxed in and trapped. We looked frantically at the rocky desert on both sides of us. Our only option was to off-road it. Should we risk it? Could we speed through the desert and make it to safety in one piece? As we topped a small incline, we saw a sign that said, Salinas Pueblo Missions National Monument, and it pointed towards the road on the left. And right at that moment, a blue pickup truck pulled out of that road and onto the highway in front of us. As we came up on the blue pickup, we saw the plate said U.S. Park Service. We looked at each other and then looked behind us. Both pickup trucks did U-turns and went the other way. We followed the blue pickup on Mountain Air and then made our way to Albuquerque. I don't know exactly what those guys' intentions were, but they weren't good. There was something seriously wrong out there. I notified the state police and they said they would keep an eye on things. This area is very near Belen, New Mexico, which is where Tara Calico was abducted. It's also about 100 miles from Elephant Butte, New Mexico, which is where David Parker Ray had his little secret torture laboratory. We didn't put all that together until later. Even though David Parker Ray had died by the time this happened to us, we do believe that there are others out there like him. And whoever abducted Tara has never been caught. Or maybe we came into meth lab territory. But since this happened on an actual highway rather than a backcountry road, I tend to discount the meth lab theory. Whatever is going on out there, it's not good.
More than 3 decades ago, back when I was a much younger man, I helped a mate of mine move down to Glasgow from our home city of Newcastle. He'd managed to get a job as a football scout for Glasgow Rangers, which was basically his dream career. And so while me and all of our mates were sad to see the back of him, we were all really proud of him too. Now, we drove up early in the morning, and then once everything was unloaded, we had some pub grub and a few loggers, shandies for me, and then I started on the drive back to Newcastle. I'd left it quite late to drive back, so it was about midnight by the time I started to see signs for the English borders. The roads were quiet, with only the occasional lorry thundering past me, and I remember there being some phone-in thing on the radio, but I wasn't really listening. I was in my old Vauxhall Cavalier, an '82 model that I bought on the cheap about 4 years prior. It normally served me well, and it had been running fine all day, but just after passing a place called Jedburgh, the temperature warning light flicked on. I looked at my dash, watching the needle climbing into the red, and swore under my breath as I eased off the accelerator. Since it normally bought me a few minutes, I cranked the heater up full blast to try and pull some heat out of the engine. But that time, It seems my luck finally ran out because just a minute or so later, there was this loud hiss from under the bonnet before steam started pouring out the seams. Seconds later, I heard this horrible metallic knocking sound coming from under the bonnet, and so I coasted over to the hard shoulder and then came to a stop just in time for the engine to seize up completely. And after that, aside from the ticking of my hazard lights and the sound of hot metal cooling down, there was nothing but silence for a few seconds, until I erupted. I remember shouting, "Are you effing kidding me?" a couple of times, and then, after taking a few deep breaths, I got out of the car and tried to fix it. And I tried it for half an hour, and in that time, a grand total of 2 cars passed me, but even with me waving at them as they passed, neither of them stopped. I didn't just stand there like some plonker for the whole 30 minutes, mind you. I popped my bonnet not long after getting out, but when I did, a load of steam and the smell of burnt coolant came wafting up into my face. And after waving away some of the steam, I spotted a crack in the top radiator hose and then noticed how loads of antifreeze was dripping onto the road and forming a big green puddle. I didn't have a spare hose, and neither did I have enough water to top it up properly, and even if I had, the engine had overheated so badly that I didn't trust it not to seize up again. Basically, I wasn't going anywhere in my old Vauxhall, and since there were no mobile phones back then, at least none for the likes of me, I had no choice but to walk if I wanted to get myself some help. Now, I reckon the nearest emergency phone would have been about a mile down the road, maybe more, and so I locked my car, left my hazards flashing, and then started walking along the dark grass verge with a torch in my hand. Now, I thought I'd be on the move for quite a while, but then no sooner had I started walking, I came to a dirt track, previously concealed by a long hedgerow, which led to what looked like a big 3-story farmer's house. Now, I was so happy that I was literally punching the air because despite the fact that there were no lights switched on the ground floor, there was what looked to be candlelight in both the front-facing upstairs rooms. I felt bad for calling so late, but since the alternative of walking along the motorway was a much more dangerous one, I reckoned that I didn't have much choice. It was a particularly dark night, small moon and cloud cover, so it was only once I got closer to the house that I saw how run down it was. The ground floor windows were either cracked or newspapered over, and there were cracks in the wood too, along with a lot of peeling paint. And as you can imagine, I started to get really bad vibes from the place. But I try not to judge books by their cover too much because you tend to be rewarded more times than you're burned for it. And so with that in mind, and granted very foolishly, I decided to knock on the door. I didn't knock too loud or aggressively. I didn't want to frighten anyone. But when my first knock got no answer, I knocked a little bit louder. Again, there was complete silence. No footsteps behind the door, no talking inside, nothing. But then after taking a step back and looking up at the top windows, I saw someone peeking out at me from behind a dirty-looking curtain. And I can't lie, it did scare me a bit seeing a pair of eyes staring back at me through the dim light. But as soon as I reacted, the eyes disappeared and I began to hear voices inside the house. Now, it sounded like a fair number of people, maybe half a dozen, and they were whispering like they were talking among themselves. I heard a little voice in my head saying, "They're awake, knock again." But before I could even dismiss it, I heard the sound of someone laughing inside the house. Not loudly, though, more like a muted sort of wheeze as they tried to keep their voice low. The bad vibes that I was getting ramped up to 11, so instead of risking a confrontation with whoever was either living or more likely squatting there, I decided to make a move. I turned around and walked back up the dirt path as fast as I could, looking over my shoulder every so often to make sure that no one was following me. Now, I was quite certain whoever was inside was watching me from those windows, but as long as they didn't follow me, then I didn't mind what they did. I'd almost gotten to the end of the path, to where those 2 wooden gate posts held no gate, when I started smelling something strong on the breeze, something that smelled like burning. And then when I turned the corner and could see out onto the road again, I felt this almost involuntary scream jump out of my mouth as I realized what the smell was. It was my car. My car was on fire. Now, I suppose I acted on complete instinct in running over to it because there was absolutely bugger all I could do about putting out that fire. All I could do was just stand there, effing and blinding and looking around for whoever might have done it. But as you can probably guess, there was no one, and the whole area looked deserted. And I knew for a fact that it wasn't. When I realized just how much of a bad situation I truly was in, I started jogging along the road until I got back on the motorway. Now, it was only a 4-lane carriageway, so I could walk along the verge without being in too much danger, but no matter how much danger passing cars posed to me, it still seemed safer than hanging around my burning car in that creepy house. Now, I think probably about a half an hour must have passed with only the odd car going past me, and in that time, I didn't try to get anyone's attention just in case it was the people from the home. I mean, the joke was on them in a sense because that poor cavalier was definitely on her way out, but on the off chance they wanted to do more than just burn my car, I had to be very careful about who I revealed myself to. Now, I was bloody nervous for that first half an hour, but after that, I started to calm down a wee bit. I hadn't seen any cars or anything parked outside the house, and if they really did want to chase me down for whatever reason, I reckoned that I'd have encountered them already. So once I'd calmed down a bit, and after maybe 2 or 3 more cars passed me with me sticking to the trees on the verge, I made my way to the edge of the road and then stuck my thumb out at what looked like a Land Rover of some kind coming my way. Now, it slowed down as the driver saw me, but then instead of switching on the light above the wheel, someone in the passenger seat started shining a torch in my face after lowering their window. Now, right away, I knew that wasn't promising behavior when I realized whoever was in the car didn't want to be seen, and I turned and started walking away. Now, a second later, I heard a very promising, "Need a lift, pal?" Now, one that was just friendly enough to slow me down and make me think that I might have been overreacting. But then the second I slowed, I turned back to face the car, and the passenger doors opened up and I heard someone shout, "Get him!" Now, I remember running right at the trees at the side of the road. Not along the road where the car would have been able to cut me off, but at and then through the trees and bushes at the side of the road. I remember closing my eyes as I felt things scratching against my face, and then when I opened them, I found that I'd come to a fence on the other side. I hopped over it with speed and power that I didn't even know I had in me. I mean, I was hardly some couch potato back then, but I wasn't exactly in perfect shape either. But I swear, I think I vaulted that fence like an Olympic athlete for fear of what might have happened if those men had caught up with me. It's strange thinking back on it as well, because these days, all I do sometimes is sit and wonder why those people chose to go after me like they did. But in the moment, as I was running, it didn't matter a jot to me. All I knew was that those people were out to get me, and all that mattered in the world was getting away from them in that moment. Now, I ran across this big dark field for what felt like ages, running and running until I couldn't anymore. And then when I got to the other side and spotted a road ahead of me, I swear I saw that same Land Rover driving along the road with someone shining a torch out into the field. I had to change my route and head off at an angle to avoid the Land Rover, and along with anyone to my rear who might have followed me. I had to force myself to run when I didn't think that I could run anymore, and even though I was quite a fit young lad and one pumped full of adrenaline, I soon felt like that I was about to cough up a lung and fall over. In the end, I found myself staggering onto a road and then right back onto another dark field because I was too scared to be out in the open with a car full of blokes trying to find me. I kept on going like that until I came across a small town. And then as I was walking its dark and empty streets, looking for anyone who might be able to help, a police car appeared, and an officer asked what I was doing walking the streets alone like that. When I told him what had happened to me, he told me to jump in the car, and then off we went to the police station for a cup of hot tea and a few biscuits, while I went into more detail about what had happened. As soon as I mentioned the house that I'd stopped by and mentioned how there had been people inside, I remember these two officers giving each other a look because they told me that the people inside must have been squatters. I thought that they might have been, partly because of how run down the house was, but the police confirmed that it was derelict and that there shouldn't have been anyone in there. They said that they'd head over and check it out, but they doubted anyone would be there. Squatters are kind of like rats. They're annoying and sometimes they're dangerous, but they're not stupid, and they just move on someplace else and then maybe return when things all blew over. But in all likelihood, they were gone from that house for good. I remember asking the two policemen why. As in, why had they burned my car before trying to hunt me down like that? And the first words out of the policemen's mouths were, "Well, what did you see?" He was convinced that I'd seen them doing something that they shouldn't have been doing, and after spotting my car, which they assumed was still functional, they tried to make sure that I couldn't get away before chasing me down. But that was the thing. I hadn't seen anything, and once I'd established that, all we could think of was that those squatters just wanted to scare me off. One of the policemen said that since they didn't know who I was, they might have assumed that I was some kind of bailiff or law enforcement agent. And at first, they might have been worried that I was a policeman. But then when they realized that I wasn't, they must have reckoned that I was fair game for a kicking. And if only to make sure that I was too scared to return. And with nothing else to say, I gave the police the phone number for my flat in Newcastle, and then, since I literally lost everything but my wallet, one of them was kind enough to give me a lift to a nearby train station. It was long past dawn by then, so the trains were running, and I didn't have to wait long before I was on my way back to Newcastle. They phoned a few days later saying that that house was empty, and there wasn't much in the way of evidence tying anyone to the arson. They promised to keep their ears to the ground and would let me know immediately if there was any progress, but till then, they advised me to be patient because things like that took time. Sadly, that was the last I heard from the police, marking the end of my first encounter with squatters, and hopefully my last, too. I had no idea that those people could be so violent. I mean, call me naive, but the squatters I was familiar with were the hippies who took over empty houses in London in the 60s. I thought that they'd be more into peace protests and drum circles than chasing down strangers. But I suppose times had changed then, and people changed with them. Almost 10 years ago now, way back in September of 2016, I drove all the way from LA to Phoenix to visit an old high school friend. Now, I was 31 and female, but still Hispanic and still small, and I drove out on a Friday and we spent all day Saturday together. And then, even though I planned to drive back home in the mid-afternoon on Sunday, I didn't end up leaving until about 9 p.m. at night. Now I know, I should have left earlier, and I know what I'm about to tell you is basically my own damned fault for not sticking to my plan. But even so, there are still nights sometimes, even all this time later, when I find myself waking up from nightmares with a cold sweat forming on my chest, having relived it all over again in my sleep. It was just after midnight when I rolled into Riverside County after passing over the Arizona state line. Now, a few people were still up in that area, so it wasn't completely dead, but after I passed the airport and the Mesa Verde complex, the 10 got super quiet again, and it seemed like there was no one but me out there for miles and miles. I was just trying to keep myself awake with some music and by blasting some cold air when suddenly I noticed a pair of headlights in my rear view. Someone was coming up on me, and really fast too, and seeing how fast they were going, I honestly figured it was the police. I didn't panic or anything, I wasn't doing anything wrong, and I didn't have anything in the car that I shouldn't have, and so I just sat tight, kept my speed, and let them get closer and closer. When they got so close their headlights were blinding me if I looked up into the rear view, I figured they'd pass and keep going. But they stayed put, right behind me in the same lane, and didn't budge for at least a couple of minutes. I'm trying to figure out if these guys really are cops, because it looked like they were driving in one of those big sliding door vans. Only this one was all blacked out, like even the windows looked like they were tinted. Now, there was nothing on it to say that they were police, and no lights on the top either, so I started getting really nervous thinking, what the hell do these guys want with me? Like I said, they stayed behind me like that for a couple of minutes, and then by the time they dropped back a little, they sped up to try and pass me, and I was actually super relieved. Now, I thought because they weren't trying to follow anymore, I was out of danger, when in reality, I was in more danger than I could have ever even imagined. I just let them pass, because what the heck was I going to do? But then instead of passing me and speeding off, the black van pulled back into the same lane as me and then started cruising maybe 10 to 15 minutes in front like it was trying to block me. I thought, oh, big deal, right? Like I could just slow down and lose them. But I didn't think that I'd need to, so I didn't. I stayed right where I was, slowing only a little to just a safe distance between us, and then kept on cruising just like the van was. Oh, I had no idea what they were up to, and I think maybe curiosity really did almost kill the cat here, because when the van's rear doors swung open, and I saw a man in leathers with some kind of bandana wrapped around his face, I kind of just froze up. I couldn't think of a single good reason why he'd want to open the back doors like that, and for a second I thought that he might be planning on jumping out for some reason. I don't know what I was thinking. All I did was lean on the brake a little and put just a little more feet between myself and that van. I just had no idea that I'd moved right where he wanted me. I dropped back a little more, still wondering what the hell these guys were doing and why they didn't have any plates on the back of their van. I then watched as the man with the bandana around his mouth began to smile at me. I obviously couldn't see his mouth, but I could see it in his eyes. That or the dust was getting to him, because it's like he squinted before turning his back on me and carefully leaning down to grab something. Now, I might sound crazy or dumb to y'all who are reading this back in almost slow-mo, and maybe I was just too tired and slow or naive as heck, but I could not conceive of what he was about to do next, no matter how obvious it seems looking back on it. And so I just watched as the guy hauled something up into his arms, turned around, and then tossed it out onto the freeway in front of him. I saw what it was way too late, and I guess that moment of panic really did slow me down, but I had just enough in me to turn the wheel at just the right moment, so that when that old engine block came bouncing up off the blacktop, it smashed into my windshield on the passenger side and not into me. And once it hit, instinct told me to slam on the brakes, and so that's what I did, bringing my car to a spinning, screeching stop. Before I realized that I was covered in glass and there was basically a giant gaping hole where my windshield used to be. I just remember sitting there and shaking after I turned off my engine, and then I got out, walked to the side of the highway with my phone and dialed 911. And it wasn't until I described exactly what had happened as calmly as I could that I suddenly just broke down when the operator told me to stay on the line while she transferred me to someone. And after that, it was a case of guiding the cops and EMS to where I was so I could be taken to the ER. Aside from a few cuts and some mild whiplash, I was pretty much good to go, but I was reminded of just how lucky I'd been by that doctor. The cops had said the same thing, and that's why I say reminded, but at the time it didn't all the way feel lucky, and it wouldn't for quite some time. I knew I was lucky to be alive, and it wasn't like I was completely blind to how lucky I'd been in that respect, but all I could think about in the months afterwards was, why me? Like, why did they pick me of all the people they could have picked to throw a damn engine at? Like, I know they were trying to kill me. I just want to know what it was about me that made them think, yeah, this is the one. Let's turn her into hamburger meat. The cops didn't find that van or the people inside it, and I don't mean any disrespect to the boys in blue when I say this, but I didn't have much faith that they would. It was a black van, no plates, traveling in the middle of the damn night in the middle of the damn desert, and it might as well have been a ghost. And that fits too, because you know something? It sure as heck haunts me like one. So I used to drive taxis in Liverpool back in the 80s. Now, it was great money for what it was, and so even though I only planned on doing it long enough to find a replacement for the job I'd lost, I ended up driving for almost 3 years before I finally gave up. A big appeal was that I could work when I wanted. If I had something that I needed doing in the daytime, be it something with the kids' school or whatever, I could just take a few hours off, take care of business, and then head out on the jobs again at night to make up the hours. And there was no doing that in a factory or down on the docks, not without getting your pay docked anyway. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses, and I remember one particular job where for a minute or two, it didn't look like I was going to make it home to my family that night. It started when a job came through just after 10 p.m., asking me to take someone from Agbirth Vale to Anfield. I got the address, drove over, and then parked up outside a small 2-up, 2-down on a dark and quiet street. I didn't want to beat my horn, which was the usual method of letting a customer know that we were outside, so I gave dispatch a buzz on my radio and asked them to call the customer back to let them know that I was waiting. Dispatch said no one picked up the phone, but then maybe a second or two later, I saw someone walking out of a house and towards my car. Now, as I said, it was dark, so even though I saw the shape of them moving towards the back passenger door, I didn't get a good look at them until they were sitting behind me, and when I did, I almost pissed my kecks. He was wearing a balaclava, and after he shut the door, he sank down low in the seat to make it harder for him to be seen from the outside. Now, he had what looked like a jerry can of petrol in one gloved hand, and then with the other, he pulled out what looked like an old detective gun from his jacket, like a proper six-shooter, and pointed it directly at me. He said if I tried to run, I'd be shot. In fact, if I did anything that even remotely upset him, I was a dead man. Now, my only job was to do what he said, and when he said it, and if I did, I'd go home alive that night. And so, seeing as I didn't have much of a choice, I drove where he told me to go. We ended up parked up across from a pub not far from the Rialto on Upper Parliament Street, I remember, and the lad in the back told me to turn off the engine and then spent the next 15 minutes or so checking his watch and peering up over the solid part of the door to watch the pub through the window. He kept on checking his watch, and I kept getting the urge to try and talk him out of whatever he was about to do. But every time the words were about to come out, something stopped them. I stayed quiet, and then noticed that when the clock on my dash hit 11 p.m., the lad in the back started getting even twitchier. When I noticed people coming out of the pub, obviously around kick-out time, the lad told me to start the engine. He was watching the pub doors like a hawk, and then suddenly, he started rolling down the window all frantically before he pointed the gun out the window, shouted something I couldn't make out, and pulled the trigger. One of the fellas who just walked out of the pub hit the concrete like a wet sack of spuds. Someone screamed, and then the guy in the back seat let out a scream of his own as he told me to drive. I obviously had to stay under the speed limit where possible, but it was tough with a gun pressed in the back of my head every so often, with its owner telling me that if I stopped for the police or took us down any dead ends, I'd be getting one to the back of the dome. The lad directed me to drive all the way out towards Speke to some of the derelict land near where the airport is today. He told me to get out of the car and then started emptying that can of petrol all over the seats after joining me outside. And that was the closest I had got to trying to do something when I realized that I was about to lose my car. I know that probably sounds horrible, seeing as I didn't do anything about him shooting that fella outside the pub, but I wasn't really in any position to do anything back then, whereas watching him pour that gasoline with his back to me, I knew that there was a very slim chance that I'd be able to get the drop on him. But if I didn't, I was a dead man. And so I basically talked myself out of it in my head and then watched as he set my car on fire and then ran off into the darkness. I just remember feeling numb. Less than an hour before, I hadn't even received the job yet, and then just a short while after parking outside that house to pick them up, my life had been changed forever. We obviously didn't have any phones back then, so I couldn't just call the police with a mobile like I would now. I had to walk all the way to a payphone, which took quite a while before I could contact the police, and only then could I give them any details. All I wanted to do was go home, get in the bath, and crack open one of the beers that I had waiting for me in the fridge. But the police wanted me to wait where I was so I could guide them to where my car had been dumped. It honestly didn't take all that long, and I'm grateful the police got out to me so fast, but the last thing in the world I wanted to do was go back to where my car was still smoldering and repeat my story for a second time. But I had to, because the most important thing was making it really bloody clear that my part in the murder was an unwilling one, and I did that by giving them as much info as possible on the man that had done the shooting. But when they asked if I'd be willing to appear in a court at a later date, I told them no. Call me a coward, but to me, you'd have to be mental to testify against some gangster in this city. Maybe if I was in London or New York or somewhere like that, but not Liverpool, because everyone knows everyone round here. And they said that I might get asked again if murder detectives were put on the case and they found someone they wanted to charge, but the fact that I never got that call is the only proof that I need that they didn't catch anyone. I used to have nightmares about it too, proper horrible ones as well, but nowadays I just have these dreams, not quite nightmares but still clear enough for me to remember when I wake up in the morning, and sometimes in those dreams I do what I wanted to do in the moment and beg the killer to reconsider, but no matter what I say and no matter how I say it, he never, ever listens.
I was on an unfamiliar, desolate highway, trying to make a last-minute drive across the states to get to my brother's remote home in northern Utah. I'd gotten the dates of some of our plans mixed up and kind of forced myself to have to drive through the night because of my mistake. The whole thing was a mess and had me tired and stressed out. And because of it, I didn't notice when my GPS told me to turn off the road that I'd been on for 100 miles and to exit. It wasn't until after I'd missed it that I immediately realized my mistake. Wasn't anything I could do but keep driving and turn around somewhere up ahead, or see if the GPS would switch the directions around. After a minute, I noticed it was still loading on the rerouting screen, so I assumed I just needed to turn around. It was unlikely this desolate area had any alternate routes anyway. But as I kept driving, I couldn't find any way to turn around. The road just kept going. At one point, about a mile past the exit, I passed a car on the shoulder with their hazards on. Looked like your average black sedan, which I just assumed was also probably kinda lost in figuring out where to go. I slowed down a bit after passing them just to make sure I didn't pass a turnaround spot. From then on, the road very quickly merged into one lane and became significantly more narrow, with the woods closing in. It no longer felt like a highway. It felt like some lost continuation of the road that was abandoned. Whatever it really was, I knew I definitely should not be there. So I pulled over just to think things through and figure out how to turn around. The GPS was completely stuck on this loading screen, and my phone wouldn't load anything either. I looked out my windows, but it was too dark and there were no streetlights, so I had to get out just to look around. On both sides of the road were very dense, clearly uninhabited forest. I couldn't even see the other side of the highway that went in the other direction. It was just woods, which meant that at some point the other side split off, and I had no way to know how far back that was, or how far ahead I had to go before they came back together and had a way for me to turn around. I really didn't like being in that spot though, surrounded by woods on a strange, vacant stretch of road. I did think for a moment about just going back the way I came, essentially driving the wrong way on the road, all the way back to the exit, but it felt very wrong and unsafe, and I'd driven a fairly long way down the road already, so it wouldn't be just a quick drive. I decided against it, thinking the two roads up ahead had to connect at some point. Best bet was to keep driving, and surely there had to be a turnaround. Before I got back into my car to leave, I looked back the way I came and saw a figure walking in the road. He was walking toward me and was still far away. I thought it was likely the person that I saw pulled over with their hazards on, but also thought it was strange he had left his vehicle and was walking down the road in this direction. I got back in and started to continue driving. The road got rougher the further I went, until I'd say a half mile from where I stopped, the road suddenly ended. There was a roadblock fence across the pavement, blocking off the rest of the road. I got out to get a better look, and from the looks of it, it didn't seem to go on any further. At least not paved. Seemed like it might have continued into a gravel road, but it was hard to say because it was so dark out. Although I did see something else out there. I didn't notice it right away. It wasn't until my eyes were more adjusted that I saw this figure standing out by the trees. It was so unexpected and strange that I didn't even believe it was a figure at first, and that it had to be some way the shadows were playing tricks with me. But over the next few seconds, my eyes started getting wider, and I got more and more of this dreading feeling that it really was a figure standing out there. He wasn't moving and seemed to be just looking back at me. I took a few slow steps back, then turned to get into my car, and literally jumped when I was face to face with a man standing right behind me. It was the guy I saw walking down the road earlier. He had a short, dense beard and a buzz cut with a hood over his head. I never even heard him approaching. I stared at him wide-eyed for several long seconds. "Road's closed. You can't get out this way, ma'am." I almost whispered sorry, not able to hide my fear. His eyes shifted over my shoulder at the woods, then back to me. "You okay? You seem shaken up." He said it in a strangely friendly tone, almost like we were buddies or something. I nodded my head and apologized again, saying I just thought I'd seen something out there, but that I was probably just tired. His face stiffened, and he tilted his head down a bit to almost force me to make eye contact with him. "What is it you think you saw?" I realized my mistake the moment he said that, just from his deep, condescending voice and the way he asked me. I stuttered nothing in a mumbled whisper and quickly opened my door and got in the car. The man stayed where he was for a moment, then approached the window as I got my keys out and started the car. I didn't stay long enough for anything else to happen. I backed out, did a really fast 3-point turn, and sped down the road. A few minutes later, I passed by that car with the hazards on again, then finally got to the exit and drove away from there. I don't know for sure what I ran into out there, but I have a really bad feeling about whatever was going on in those woods. And I know if I stayed or told the man what I'd seen, I probably would have gotten answers, but not in a good way. I'm writing this just after getting back from a road trip during the holidays, while everything is still fresh. This wasn't too long of a trip, but mostly on a straight stretch of road with nothing around. To make everything work with my schedule, doing the drive back home overnight was my best option. The first several hours from 7 p.m. to probably 12 were very boring and uneventful. By that time of night, I was the only car on the road, and being fully dark out, the whole highway looked the same for every mile. It was exhaustingly boring. At some point around then, a single car's headlights came into view, way down the road, going in the other direction. This highway was so straight and empty that I noticed it 2 or 3 minutes before it actually got close and passed by. I didn't really pay all that much attention to it, but it was the only other thing on the road. After it passed, I happened to do another round of checking my mirrors and saw bright red brake lights from that other car. It had noticeably slowed down and switched lanes. Then it suddenly did a U-turn. There were no designated U-turn areas though, and the two sides of the highway were separated by a grassy ditch. This car drove down into the ditch and then up onto my direction of the road, then started driving up behind me. I thought this person was crazy, but also thought they must have really needed to turn around for some reason, and was waiting for them to speed past me. They did pick up speed. However, once they got close to me, they slowed and matched my speed, staying right behind me. I was sure there was no way this person saw me on the other side of the highway and had done all of this because of me. But as the minutes went on, and this car didn't switch lanes, I got a little nervous. And then he started flickering his headlights, flashing his high beams like he was trying to communicate something to me. There was no one else around he possibly could have been signaling to. We were the only two cars on the road, so I knew he was doing it to get my attention, which kind of freaked me out. It wasn't just a couple flashes either, like signaling a cop was nearby. He kept doing it for miles. I wasn't really sure what to do here. I couldn't see what the hell this guy wanted from me, or why he was doing any of this. Also, with his headlights and how dark it was, I couldn't actually see his car. I had no way of getting a description of it. After a while, I passed a sign for a rest area in 3 miles. I figured this was my chance to pull off in an area where other cars were around, and hopefully let this guy just continue down the road and leave me alone. Even if the other cars at the rest stop were just people sleeping, it would still feel way safer. When the exit finally showed up, I pulled off the highway. It wasn't what I expected at all, though. I had never seen a rest stop like this. The exit ramp spiraled down and went under the highway, through a sort of tunnel, I guess, and then to the rest area. So instead of there being 2 separate pull-offs on either side of the highway, there was just this one large area that both sides were connected to. And like I said, I went under the highway, so the rest area was actually sort of at the bottom of a hill off the highway. It felt very isolating. You couldn't see or even hear anything from the road above, which I assume was the whole point. More concerning though, no other cars were there. The whole parking lot was empty. I checked my rearview mirror first, not seeing any headlights, then decided to pull into a spot right near the building. The guy following me was pretty close behind me, so not seeing his headlights made me pretty sure he didn't catch the exit. I kept checking the entrance to the rest stop, and after a minute, I finally took a deep breath and felt so relieved. Now there, parked at a rest stop, I realized just how tired I was, especially after all of that going on. The building looked like it had bathrooms and a vending machine, so I figured I should go in while I was there. I got out, locked my car, and walked inside. I was only in there for maybe a minute or 2. I was going to get something from the vending machine on my way out to help me refuel, but it was out of commission. As soon as I left the building, though, I saw another car. Despite this massive rest stop being entirely empty, it was parked oddly just one space away from mine. I felt my heart sink and my stomach tighten. I had no real way to know if it was the same car that was following me, but in my gut, I was absolutely sure of it. Its windows were tinted, and the brights were still on, so between the glare and everything, I couldn't see who was inside of it. I walked slowly up to my car, getting in and having that feeling that eyes were on me. I wasted no time putting my keys in the ignition and starting the car to leave. Or trying to. The car wouldn't start. It wouldn't even try to start. Turning the key did nothing. Instantly, I felt adrenaline coming through as I realized the real danger I was now stuck in. I stared at my useless keys dangling from the ignition for a moment, feeling this surreal, out-of-body sense, just completely unable to process that I was in this situation, knowing how likely awful this was going to end up. I got my phone out and dialed 911, sure the person in the car would see and immediately get out to break into my car, knowing that I couldn't go anywhere. I was scared to even look to my side. My voice was shaky, telling the operator where I was and that I was stuck and my car wouldn't start. But once I mentioned that the car that was next to me had been following me, The woman on the other line suddenly talked faster and asked for more details, like she was suddenly a little more worried and rushing, or had heard of something similar before. I told her everything, and she had police on the way 10 minutes out. I still hadn't even looked to the car next to me, scared of what I'd see. But then the car slowly started to back out. They slowly pulled away, and then moved their car directly behind mine. The side of their car had to be just a couple of feet from my back bumper, and then they stopped, blocking me in. Few seconds later, I heard a door open. I saw movement in my mirror, and when I looked, I saw a tall man in a dark brown winter jacket slowly approaching the side of my car. He came right up to the window, hovering over me. I was terrified, again scared to even look at him, but I felt his disturbing presence right on the other side of my window, quietly staring in at me. The man didn't speak or try to open the door. He just stood there. I continued telling the woman on the phone what was happening. After a minute, the man slowly moved around my car, passing by the front and going to the other side. I don't know if he was looking inside for something or what, but he walked around it several times. Then he walked back to his car, got in, and slowly drove away. I watched his headlights go through the tunnel and disappear. 5 minutes later, an officer pulled into the rest stop. He quickly got information from me and told me another officer was a few minutes out that would help me with my car, but after being sure I was okay, he seemed to be more in a hurry to chase down the guy that was following me. It turned out the man had cut the ignition cable from my battery, which I didn't even know was a thing that someone could do so easily. I was able to get towed out safely and had it repaired in the morning. I called multiple times for updates from the police station, but got nothing. It really felt like something more was going on, from the way the operator suddenly sounded rushed and worried, and the officer wanting to chase him down immediately. And overall, I couldn't figure out what that guy wanted from me. He followed me for miles, flashing his lights, then cut my ignition and had me stranded in an isolated rest stop with no one around. But he didn't do anything. He just creepily and eerily walked around my car. I'm wondering if anyone knows what he might have been doing, or had something similar happen. Again, this was only a few days ago, so there's still a chance something else comes from it. I'll let you know and provide an update if anything significant is found out. I'm a trucker for a local company out of Montana. We deliver all throughout the states, but mostly my routes went to and from the Midwest. Where we were based out of, no big highways really go directly through us, and so a lot of my routes are on long, barren roads with very little traffic. Even other truckers were few and far between. Anyway, I was on a pretty standard route this night, heading through the usual states to a common supplier. I always had my CB radio picking up channel 19, which is the universal line that most truckers use to communicate with each other if need be, or just to have conversations. Although it usually remained quiet for all of my drives, because nobody was within range. At about 1 a.m., the radio started crackling, like it was connecting to something, or picking up a signal in the distance. Faintly, I could hear a man talking, but it was way too scratchy and muffled to make anything out from it. I tried shutting it off and turning it back on, but it seemed to have lost signal to whoever it was picking up from. I thought nothing of it and kept driving. The road and the radio stayed quiet for another little while. I didn't pass by any other cars or even buildings. It was just empty. And then the radio came back on again. It was just crackling, with no voices. And after 30-ish seconds, the crackling started to get obnoxiously loud. I thought the thing might have been broken, and was considering just shutting it off for the rest of the drive. But just before I reached over, a voice came through. It wasn't clear by any means, but it was definitely the same voice from the man a while back, and the radio seemed to have picked up in the middle of him speaking. I was able to barely make out what he was saying. He was listing off details, describing something in this eerie, monotone voice.
Gray cab, white doors, white trailer, blank sides.
He was listing the exact description of the semi I was driving, and at the end of this unsettling descriptive line of details, he said the direction I was driving in, and then his voice abruptly cut out. The radio crackled and buzzed, with nothing else. No responses and no more voices. I left it just quietly crackling for several minutes before shutting it off. What the hell was that? I checked all my mirrors and looked everywhere, but there were no other cars or trucks near me. How was anyone in range to be on the radio? And why did they have an exact, detailed description of what I was driving? I was actually weirded out and nervous enough to call one of my buddies back at the warehouse, just to let him know about this strange thing going on. But my call dropped because I had no service. For the next half hour, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It honestly felt unexplainable. I knew that there was a gas station up ahead, so I decided even though my tank wasn't too low, I'd stop there, top off the tank, and maybe head in to ask the attendant if they knew anything about this weird radio message. This gas station was very small and very remote. As I pulled in, it was also very obvious that the store part where an attendant would be was closed. I still pulled through and parked near a pump. I got out and started to top up the tank. I was tired, and as I stood there waiting and looking around, the gas station started to give me an uncomfortable feeling. Not just that I was alone out there, with nothing around, but more that I felt like I wasn't alone. I took the pump out early, just to get out of there. I got in and started to pull out, and the moment I did, I saw a truck coming down the road from the direction I just came from. They had no headlights on, and the truck looked beat up, rusting and very old. Looked like they were about to turn into the gas station, but when they saw me pulling out, they stopped. Like just right there in the road, lights off and waiting. After a moment, I continued to get on the road and drive. Hard not to think the truck was trying to go unnoticed, which is obviously very suspicious. The way they stopped was like they were hoping I didn't see them. That feeling, though, the uneasy feeling, didn't really go away like I thought it would. Something still felt like it was wrong. And I got just a few minutes down the road before coming to a stop. There was a car right in the middle of the road, partially sideways, and in front of it was a man. He was waving his arms at me and walking quickly toward the door to my truck, as if telling me to stop and that he needed help. His car looked undamaged though, and he didn't even look hurt. And it's not like there was anything out here that could have possibly forced him to stop in the middle of the road like that. As he was approaching, I instinctively looked in my mirror and just heartily saw a shape emerging from the road behind me. I knew it was that truck from the gas station, and right away I knew this was some sort of trap. I pushed on the gas, and this guy in front of me was committed, or dumb enough, to not even jump out of the way. I nearly ran him over, trying to get around him, and somehow even maneuvered into the other lane and around the car without hitting it. Maybe the trailer scraped up against it a bit, but nothing too bad. When I looked back, I saw the truck stop by the man and another man get out. One of them even looked like he was yelling at the other. I reported it to the police when I had a chance to, but of course the cars and the men were gone by then. I still don't truly know what was going on. If it was the truck on the radio, then he had been following me for a while, and been in contact with the car ahead of me, I guess coordinating this plan to get me to stop. I'm just thankful I listened to my gut and left the gas station when I did, and didn't even try to figure out what was going on the road. One wrong move probably could have ended with me going missing on the side of that isolated highway.
I was 23 and just starting a new job in the city. Money was tight after graduation, and most apartments in close neighborhoods were out of my budget. That's when I found this online listing for a room in a quiet residential area in the outskirts of the city. The landlord was exclusively seeking female tenants, and the price was almost too good to be true for a single furnished room with all the utilities included. A bit skeptical, I connected with the landlord over the phone. She said her name was Marlene, and she was a retired neurosurgeon. She lived alone in a 3-bedroom house and preferred women who could keep her company and wouldn't make her feel uncomfortable. On the video call, Marlene seemed nice enough, maybe a little eager. She kept saying how excited she was to have a young woman in the house again and that it had been too quiet since her last tenant moved out. I moved in on a Saturday. Marlene was waiting outside when I pulled up and hugged me immediately. She held on a little too long and said she was so happy I was finally here. The room was nice and clean, with fresh paint. She'd put flowers on the dresser and said she wanted to make me feel at home. The first few days were fine. Marlene hardly did anything besides odd community services, so she was around a lot. I didn't mind at first, but she began to become overly friendly rather quickly. She touched my hair when we passed in the hallway and tell me how beautiful I was. She'd ask what products I used. She insisted we eat dinner together every night, said it was lonely eating alone, and that she loved having company. I tried to be polite and said yes a few times, but it quickly became an expectation. She'd also compliment everything I wore and would stare constantly. Many times, I'd look up from my laptop and catch her watching me. She'd smile like she hadn't realized she was doing it. At night, it got worse. I'd be in my room with the door closed, and I'd look up to see her standing in the doorway, grinning. I started locking my door at night, but the feeling wouldn't go away. One night, I decided to test something. I pretended to be asleep and left my door cracked just enough to see if she'd come by. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hall. Through my half-closed eyes, I saw her silhouette in the doorway. She stood there for maybe 15 minutes before she moved closer. She crouched down beside my bed. I could hear her breathing and smell her perfume. She purred how pretty I was up close, and how she just couldn't wait to feel all of it. My skin crawled, but I kept my eyes closed and breathing steady. I pretended I was still asleep. Eventually, she left, but I didn't sleep the rest of that night. First thing the next morning, I ordered a tiny hidden camera, the kind that passes for a phone charger, and set it up in my room, angled toward the hallway. The plan was simple. I'd quietly track Marlene's movements for the rest of the day, just until I could find somewhere else to live. That night, I locked my door and went to bed with my phone next to me and the camera app open. At 2:14 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the app and saw Marlene crawling in the hallway outside my door on all fours. My door was locked, but I watched in horror as she pressed her face against the gap at the bottom, trying to peep inside. She stood up and tried the handle. When it didn't open, she lingered for a bit, staring directly at the camera, and waved. Then she turned around and crawled back down the hallway. I couldn't breathe or move. I just stared at my phone screen, trying to process what I'd just seen. The next morning, there was a knock at my door. It was Marlene, and she was holding a bouquet. She said we needed to talk, and she could tell I was pulling away. She said she didn't want to lose another girl like last time. I didn't open the door. I told her through it that I was getting ready for work. She stood there for a long time before she finally left the flowers outside my door and walked away. I called in sick to work and started packing immediately. I didn't have another place lined up or any kind of plan. I just knew I needed to leave. By the time Marlene got back from wherever she'd gone that afternoon, I was already loading the last box into my car. She came outside asking what I was doing. I told her I had a family emergency and had to move back home immediately. She started crying and said I couldn't leave. She said we'd been so happy together and that I was just like the last girl. She said she couldn't go through this again. I got in my car and locked the doors. She stood in the driveway, watching me pull away, still sobbing. I stayed with a friend for 2 weeks before I found a new place. Never went back for my deposit. I just wanted to be far away from her. That was 8 months ago. I still think about it sometimes. I wonder what happened to the last tenant. Did she leave too? Or did something else happen? I reported it to the police and showed them the camera footage. They said it was creepy, but not technically illegal. They said unless she'd harmed me or threatened me directly, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested I file for a restraining order if I felt unsafe, but I didn't. I just wanted to forget all about it. But sometimes, when I'm walking downtown, I swear, I see her standing across the street staring, or in the grocery store 2 aisles over watching. I tell myself I'm being paranoid and that she wouldn't follow me. But I can't shake the feeling that she's still watching. I was 19 when I moved to the city for university. My parents lived in a small village about 3 hours away, and student housing was expensive. My father suggested I stay with an old college friend of his who was a professor of psychology. I met Evan the day I moved in. He was polite and soft-spoken, maybe in his early 40s. He showed me to my room, which was already furnished, and told me I could use the kitchen and bathroom freely, but asked me to stay out of the basement. He said he kept research materials down there and didn't want anything disturbed. The first week was fine. Evan's car was usually gone during the day, and we didn't interact much. He'd leave notes on the kitchen counter about groceries or bills, and I'd leave rent in an envelope by the coffee maker. Soon, I started noticing things that felt off. Evan always cooked more food than one person could eat. I'd come home, and there'd be several plates drying in the dish rack. He'd tell me he had a colleague over for lunch, but I never saw anyone. When I did laundry, I'd sometimes find clothes in the washer that weren't mine or Evan's. Once, I found a pillowcase with stains that looked like dried blood. When I asked Evan about it, he said he'd cut his hand changing a light bulb in the basement. He showed me a bandage on his palm. One night, I woke up thirsty and headed toward the kitchen. That's when I heard soft pounding from the basement. At first, I thought maybe a stray animal had gotten in somehow, but the pounding continued with this steady rhythm. I crept to the basement door. Just as I reached for the handle, a voice cut through the darkness. Evan was standing at the end of the hall, backlit by his bedroom doorway. He asked what I was doing. I tried explaining I'd heard something down there. He said it was just old pipes knocking when the heat kicked on. He reminded me that the basement was always off limits. I started to say something, but he cut me off and repeated the basement was off limits. He waited until I nodded, then went back to his room. I needed to know what was in the basement. Next day, Evan had a faculty meeting. I watched him leave and waited 10 more minutes to be sure. The basement door was locked, but I'd already snuck the keys in the morning when Evan was in the shower. I opened the door. The stairs were wooden and old. At the bottom was a single dim bulb hanging from the ceiling. The basement was unfinished with a concrete floor and exposed pipes. In the corner was a mattress on the floor with a crumpled blanket covering most of it. Next to it was an IV stand with an empty bag hanging from it. There was a chair and a small table with pill bottles. On the wall was a framed photo of Evan and a woman, smiling with their arms around each other. The blanket on the mattress moved, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. The blanket shifted again, and I saw a woman, thin and pale, with eyes half open. She stared at me, but didn't seem to really see me. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. It was the woman in the photo. I heard the front door open upstairs. Evan had returned early. Maybe he'd noticed the keys missing. I ran upstairs without thinking. I could hear him in the kitchen. I made it to my room and locked the door. Seconds later, I heard his footsteps in the hallway. He stopped outside my door and tried the handle, but it was locked. He knocked and said my name quietly, asking if I was home. I didn't answer. He knocked again and told me he knew I was in there. Said we needed to talk. I grabbed my phone and backed toward the bathroom. Our rooms shared a bathroom with 2 doors on opposite sides. I locked the bathroom door from my side and opened the window. It was a first floor window, just a short drop to the grass below. I climbed out and ran. I could hear Evan trying my bedroom door, his voice getting louder, telling me to open up. I kept running until I was 2 blocks away, then called 911. I told them everything. The dispatcher told me to stay where I was. I sat on the curb shaking and watching the street for police cars. They arrived 15 minutes later and went into the house while I waited outside with an officer who asked me questions I could barely answer. 20 minutes later, they brought out the woman on a stretcher. She was conscious but weak. The paramedics took her away. They brought out Evan in handcuffs after that. He looked at me as they put him in the car. His eyes were filled with hatred and anger. I stayed with a friend that night and gave my statement at the police station the next morning. The officers told me the woman was Marissa Mercer, Evan's wife. She'd been reported dead 3 years ago. Heart failure, the death certificate said, but there'd never been a body. Evan claimed he'd had her cremated. In reality, he'd kept her in the basement. The investigators said Marissa had tried to leave him after she caught him cheating and wanted a divorce. But Evan wouldn't have it. He faked her death and kept her sedated in the basement. Marissa was in the hospital for weeks. The drugs had done damage, but she survived. She confirmed everything and said she'd tried to escape once early on, but he'd caught her. After that, he'd kept her medicated almost constantly. The pounding I'd heard was her. One of the few times she'd been conscious enough to try signaling for help. Evan was charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and fraud. It has been years, but I still think about all of it sometimes, and think about all the ways it could have ended differently. And each version freaks me out, even more. I was a junior when I got assigned a new roommate. My previous one had transferred schools, leaving me with a full apartment for about 3 weeks before housing matched me with someone to split the rent. His name was Adrian, and he was a year older than me. He was studying philosophy and religious studies. When we met, he seemed polite enough. The first week was normal. We barely saw each other. He'd be gone when I woke up, and back late when I was already in bed. But by the 3rd week, Adrian started behaving weirdly. He'd knock and ask to borrow petty things, like a pen or a phone charger, and then just stand there, talking all kinds of whacked up crap. He'd ask about identity and who I thought I really was beneath everything, about rebirth and transformation, whether I believed people could become something entirely different. I'd give vague answers and try to redirect the conversation, but he'd keep pushing with his eyes locked on mine. After a month of us staying together, I started hearing chanting from his room around 2 or 3 in the morning. I thought maybe it was prayers or some religious module he was practicing, but the tone was too intense. One afternoon, I came back early from class. The apartment was supposed to be empty since Adrian's car was in the lot, but I heard this childlike laughter coming from his room. I walked over to his door, which was cracked open just enough to peep inside. Adrian was sitting at his desk with a small mouse on the surface in front of him. He'd had one of those small utility blades and was cutting it open slowly, laughing like he was genuinely amused. I backed away before he could see me and went to my room to lock the door. I didn't come out for dinner. I was really freaked out. That night, the chanting started again, but this time it was louder, and I could smell sage and incense seeping under my door. I pressed my ear to the wall. The words were clearer now. I couldn't understand the language, but the cadence was unmistakable. He was performing some kind of ritual. The next morning, Adrian was in the kitchen making coffee when I came out. He smiled at me and asked how I'd slept. I said fine and didn't mention what I'd heard. He poured himself a cup and sat at the table. He started talking about power and how most people worship the wrong things. How they were afraid of truth because truth required sacrifice. He told me Satan was more powerful than God. He said most people didn't understand that, but he did, and I should try to understand it too. He said I should consider it and that he could help me. I stared at him and asked if he was serious. He nodded. I asked him straight up if he was in some kind of cult. Adrian smiled. His eyes went distant, like he was looking through me instead of at me. He got up, put his cup in the sink, and went back to his room without another word. I spent the whole day trying to figure out what to do. I thought about calling housing and packing up and leaving, but I kept telling myself I was overreacting and that he was just weird and eccentric. That college had all kinds of people. I should have trusted my instincts. That night, I woke up around 3 in the morning to find my room was filled with dozens of candles, casting flickering shadows across the walls. On my floor, drawn in what looked like red paint, was a pentagram. Adrian was sitting in the center of it, cross-legged with his eyes rolled back in his head so only the white showed. He was chanting the same words I'd heard through the wall, but louder now and more intense. He was in some kind of trance, with his body swaying slightly and his hands raised palm up. I couldn't move or breathe. I just stared at him sitting there on my floor performing some kind of satanic ritual while I was sleeping. His head tilted toward me, with his eyes still rolled back, like he could sense I was awake, even though he couldn't see. That snapped me out of it. I grabbed my phone and bolted out of the apartment. I stood in the hallway and called campus security. I told them everything. They arrived within 10 minutes. 2 officers went into the apartment while I waited in the hall. I heard voices. Adrian's voice was calm and confused, asking what was wrong. The officers were asking him to step outside. When they brought him out, he looked like a regular guy in sweatpants looking bewildered. The officers went back inside and were shocked to see the pentagrams and the candles. The officers asked if I wanted to file a formal complaint. I said yes and told them I wanted Adrian removed immediately. Housing moved him out that same night and put him in a temporary accommodation while they investigated. A week later, I got a call from Student Services. They told me Adrian had been sent home and that the school had contacted his parents. They recommended he get a medical evaluation before returning to campus. He never came back or finished his degree. I checked the student directory months later, and his name was gone. I moved to a different apartment with single occupancy. That was 2 years ago. I graduated last spring, and I'm living on my own now, working in the city. but I still wake up sometimes, and for a split second, I expect to see candles and Adrian sitting on my floor with his eyes rolled back, chanting in that language I couldn't understand. One thing that disturbs me even more is how Adrian set up all the candles and painted the satanic symbol on the wall without making a single sound. I'm a light sleeper, and it confuses me to think how on that particular night, I didn't feel his presence in my room until much later. I wasn't drunk, nor did I take any pills. So why didn't I hear a thing while he set up his occult ceremony in my room?
I used to work at a popular clothing store years ago. I worked there for a couple years and enjoyed it. Most of the time we would not be that busy. The store was pretty large and spread out. The weekends would often bring in a lot of people, but we could handle it. Black Friday was always the busiest day of the year though, by far. Most of the employees were scheduled to work on Black Friday every year. I was no exception when I worked there, and I remember the first one that I worked. We opened early at like 6 a.m., and from the start there were lots of people in the store. We didn't have that many registers to begin with, but they were all open. Still, despite this, there was a long line of people waiting to check out for most of the time. I normally was not a cashier and I would work around the store, but on this Black Friday I was needed at the checkouts and I worked as a cashier. This went on for probably the first 4 or 5 hours of my shift. Then finally I was off the checkouts and I was moved to working around the store. I would help customers keep things clean and organized in certain areas and things like that. I remember that I was sort of in the back end of the store and I was somewhat close to winter coats, hats, and gloves, that sort of stuff. This area of the store was probably the quietest and there wasn't that many people over there. As I was over there, I saw this man who was shopping in that section. I looked over right as he was putting a black ski mask over his head. At first, I thought that he was just trying it on, and it was one of the ski masks that we sold. But then I saw him rip off the tag, and he did not take the mask off. I thought that was weird, but still, I didn't want to go up to him and ask him what he was doing or anything. I was busy folding clothes on a display table that had been messed up. The guy was also not really that close to me. Not long after, though, I looked back and he was gone. I didn't think too much of it because Black Friday can be crazy. I quickly forgot about him for the most part. And a few minutes later, it was time for my break. So I headed over to the break room that we had, which happened to be at the back end of the store. Past one of the customer service desks, there was a few hallways and back rooms. The break room was one of them. I went in there and there were a few other employees in as well, maybe 2 or 3. Usually when I worked, there wouldn't be any, maybe one other person on break at the same time as me. I didn't know any of the employees very well that were on their break at that moment, so I just sat down at a table by myself, sort of at the front of the room. It was pretty quiet in there. Nobody was talking, and there were just a few tables and chairs, a refrigerator, and then a TV in the break room. Less than 5 minutes into my break, though, somebody suddenly entered the break room. It was the same man who I had seen earlier. I instantly recognized him because he was still wearing the ski mask. After entering the break room, the man yelled out, "Someone take me to the safe now." Everyone looked up but didn't say a word. I was thinking that it might be a joke, but I was also pretty creeped out by this. After nobody said anything for like 10 seconds, the man repeated himself. Someone behind me said that they didn't know where the safe was. He then demanded a manager. After a few seconds pause, the person behind me said nobody in the break room was a manager. The man then walked over, and I happened to be the one sitting closest to him. He grabbed my arm and made me stand up. The guy then told me that I was going to take him to the safe. I tried to pull away from him, but he had a strong grip on my arm. When I did, he claimed that he had weapons on him. I didn't see anything, but I didn't know for sure. He was much larger than I, a barely 5-foot-tall woman. The man practically dragged me out of the room and into another hallway. There were a few other hallways down there, as it was the back area of the store. No one else was in the immediate vicinity. The man told me again to tell him where the safe was, claiming that he knew we had one. Now, being 100% honest, I truly had no idea where our safe was. I didn't even know for sure if we even had one in the store. I'm guessing we did, but I never cared to know anything about it. I told the man I didn't know, and he yelled at me, claiming that I did. He seemed to think that I was a manager for some reason, and I didn't know why, because I wasn't. I was terrified. In that moment, I wished that I did know where it was so that the guy wouldn't hurt me, and I could just tell him where it was and he would leave. I wanted him to leave us alone. We walked up and down a few hallways over there with no luck. He was looking for it and kept asking me where it was, but my guess was as good as his. I told him maybe it was at the front of the store, which made him mad. He said that was just a ploy to get him out. I said there was no ploy, but the man was seeming to get panicked. He seemed to really believe that one of us back there would lead him to the store safe. I'm not sure where he got his information from. We started going to random doors in the back rooms of the store that were open. Nothing led to a safe. After what felt like a long time of wandering around the back with this guy, he walked towards an exit. Then he let go of me, ran to the door, and opened it. This was not a commonly used exit at all, so he was leaving the store to a back alley type of area. After he was gone and the door swung shut, I felt a huge amount of relief. I ran back to the break room and told everyone to call the police, which they already had. A bunch of people were coming up and asking if I was okay. I was surprised at how fast the word traveled. Within minutes, the whole store basically got shut down. There were tons of cops there, and I answered a bunch of questions from them. The man ended up being located later on in the day. I was sent home early, and our store was only closed for about an hour before opening again. That was by far my craziest Black Friday experience.
I like working alone, but this was one of those days when I wish someone had come along. I'm a home inspector for a company that deals with land acquisition and evaluation in the dying rural communities of my state. Thrilling job title, I know. Basically, when the old folks that live out in the country kick the bucket, their kids who already moved closer to the city decades ago usually decide to sell off their parents' property. Since nobody else wants to live out there either, land almost always gets bought up by a corporate entity. For better or worse, that's where contractors like me come in. Somebody has to go out there and shut off the utilities, test the soil for arability, and inspect the house to see if it's worth fixing up, or if it's cheaper to turn the whole plot into farmland. However, there are mysteries in some of these places that make me think it might be better if nobody lives there anymore. One day, I got sent out to what I thought would be a typical home inspection. The utility, soil, and survey guys had already been out, so all that was left to check was the condition of the house itself. After an hour-long drive, I arrived at the isolated house around noon. It was a typical setup, an old double-wide trailer home with a lifetime of extensions and add-ons trying to polish that affordable lower-class core. According to my supervisor, the story was that 3 months ago, the husband died first from a stroke. Then the wife died of a broken heart shortly after. The family had come out just once or twice to collect the heirlooms and whatnot, but left everything else for the corporate buyer to dispose of. Too painful to sort through it all, I guess. With a sigh, I put away my thoughts of grieving strangers and stepped out of the truck to do my job. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed there was a small fenced-in field with a rundown shed, something for me to inspect later. As always, I circled the house first before going inside. There was some damage, but the house was in good shape for its age. The only thing that struck me as odd was that the flowers around the house looked pristine and healthy. Not like they'd been left to grow wild for 3 months. It didn't really matter though. After I checked all the exterior boxes, I climbed up the porch and tried to open the front door. It was supposed to be unlocked by the previous contractor, but it wouldn't budge. Thankfully, I had a key. Otherwise, I would have driven all the way out there for nothing. Although, that might have been for the best. Stepping inside, I saw something I'll never quite forget. I'd walked into plenty of scenes similar to it in all my years of inspecting abandoned houses, but this one took the cake. Entering the living room, I saw an old, well-worn recliner. It was empty, but laid all the way back, and there was a deep brown stain in the shape of a person still laying in it. That old man died in the house for sure. People often leave a stain of urine or fecal matter as their body relaxes in death, but this wasn't that. This was full-body decomposition. Something about the story my supervisor told me wasn't adding up. The chair belonged to the husband. They were labeled Grandma and Grandpa by knitted covers thrown over the backs, but that meant the woman must have let her husband rot in the chair he died in for days before calling anyone. That's a little more than a broken heart. More like a broken mind, too. I shuddered, trying to refocus. Never mind the unlit candles arranged in a circle around the chair, with dried beads of wax dripping onto the floor beneath them. Just get to work. inspect the house, and get out. Yet everywhere I went, this empty house was still breathing. Dirty dishes in the sink, clothes half folded on the bed, water still puddled in the bathtub. It's hard to focus on the condition of door jambs and drywall when it feels like a ghost is breathing down your neck. However, it was in the master bathroom that I discovered the worst part of the house, from a home inspector's perspective anyway. On the floor by the toilet, where the heat vent should have been, was an 18-inch hole punched out by wood rot. It led straight down into the crawl space. There was no way I was squeezing through that hole, but I still had to confirm what created it, which meant I had an excuse to finally leave the house, only to crawl underneath it from the outside. So I went out and circled the house, looking for the crawl space cover that would give me the least trouble. I found one on the side facing the field and shed I saw earlier, but it looked a little too easy to get into. I had checked it just a few minutes ago and it had looked completely in place, but now it was crooked. I crouched down, took it the rest of the way off, then shined my flashlight into the crawl space. Like any other, it was full of spider webs, carcinogenic insulation, and all manner of other nasty things waiting for me to crawl on top of them. I steeled myself to get on my stomach and enter, but then at the last second, I got the urge to look over my shoulder. Call it instinct, divine intervention, or whatever, but it made me notice something. The shrubs against the fence had been parted in the wind, just barely revealing a gap where a gate had once been. I knew I was probably just procrastinating, but I decided I would go check out that shed, then come back to the crawl space. When I got to the shed, though, I realized what had been bothering me, and it wasn't superstitions about the dead husband. There was a bedroll on top of a bale of hay, looking like it was recently disturbed. Empty cans of food, just like the ones from the kitchen, were scattered around the interior. There were no squatters listed on the paperwork I got, but this was evidence to the contrary. They hadn't just hidden from us either. A small corkboard was poking out from under the bedroll. Out of involuntary curiosity, I pulled it out and looked at it, finding random scraps of paper with scribblings of countless observations, from animal activity to cars. One slip had a list of vehicles and tag numbers, with dates next to them. Recent dates, familiar vehicles, white van, white truck, license plate number. Me. It was a list of all the contractors that had come out before me. And my truck was at the bottom, the most recent arrival. Moving quickly, I ripped the list off the board and crumpled it into my hand, immediately leaving the shed and rushing back to my truck. Once I locked myself inside, I tried to call my supervisor to tell them what was going on, but I couldn't get a signal. Erring on the side of caution, I left the property with the job unfinished. Nothing I saw indicated with certainty that whoever was squatting there was hostile, necessarily. But I knew something was wrong. That kind of compulsive observation screams it. Luckily, my supervisor wasn't too hard on me. Apparently, all the other guys who had to go inside the house were spooked by the death stain too, but nobody spent as much time in there as I did. He said he'd send the new guy to bite the bullet and finish my work just this once. Only problem is, the kid never came back from that job. He made it there, but straight up ditched. No call, no text. He just quit. His family said he was alive, but nobody could get a hold of him to find out what spooked him even worse than me. My guess is he actually went into the crawl space I was too scared to enter. There must have been something in there worse than anyone's imagination. Why else would that squatter be watching an abandoned house so closely? We reported the property to the police, but of course they didn't find anything. To this day, nobody quite knows what the hell was going on there. It could have been a family member struggling to let go, a random drifter, or perhaps the wife never died of a broken heart at all. I just hope that by now, the whole place has been bulldozed. 4 years ago, I moved out of my parents' house and got settled into a nightmare. At first, everything was perfect. I had taken a gap year and was ready to get my life together. I enrolled in an online school and got a part-time job at a supermarket. Then my dad helped me rent a one-bedroom condo by co-signing the lease. Just like that, I was living on my own. I thought it was a good start, though I felt out of place. I suddenly had way more neighbors than before, but I didn't feel like one of them. I was too young, overprivileged, didn't know anybody. And hell, I had never even met my landlord. The lease was all through some agency, and my dad did all the dealing for me. For weeks, I only went outside for necessities. I felt like a recluse, perched by the windows with my cat, peering through the blinds at my neighbors, wishing I knew how to start a conversation with them. I never figured that out, but I noticed one person who seemed to always be around no matter what time of day. It was an older white guy, probably in his 50s. He drove a tan mid-2000s SUV. Clearly he lived there, probably in the stack across the street. It didn't seem like he worked or did much, but I tried not to judge. About a month in, my opinion changed. I kept seeing him in the parking lot outside my work too. It was a nearby grocery store, so he could have easily just been shopping there. But my schedule was very irregular. I worked the same 8-hour shift 3 days in a row each week. That man was always outside the store as I got off, every single time. The question I kept thinking was, who goes grocery shopping 3 days in a row? And why always 3 p.m.? Even worse, what made me dread seeing his car was when I realized I never saw him in the store. He was always sitting in his car, smoking cigarettes with the windows cracked. When I looked outside my window at home, I'd see him. When I looked outside the door at work, I saw him there too. I had to be overthinking this. I was just being paranoid because I'd been isolating myself. To fix my brain, I started going out to random coffee shops to study instead of studying exclusively at home. That remedy might have worked had the man in the tan SUV not started showing up in those parking lots too. I could never catch him following me when I was going somewhere or when I arrived, but every time I went to leave, I'd see that SUV. He was never parked right next to my car, though always backed in and pointed vaguely toward it. That man was usually in the SUV, smoking with the windows cracked just like he did at my job, but he never made eye contact with me, not even accidentally. It felt intentional. Neighbors who keep running into each other eventually make eye contact, even if it's just for a split second. It's just human. This guy was not. Unsure what else to do, I started taking pictures of his car whenever I saw it. But I ran into problems there too. My phone camera couldn't zoom in well, and since the guy always backed in, I couldn't get his plate. His grimy windshield and smoke-filled interior made any shots I ever got of his face terrible too. Still, I quickly amassed an album of evidence. I showed my dad, and he was concerned, but not in the way I wanted him to be. He thought I was being too paranoid, convincing myself that someone was following me, when they were just my neighbor and went to similar places. I couldn't convince him it was deeper than that, but he told me if I was truly concerned, I should call the police and file a report. The cops were much more direct about calling me hysterical. That was crushing to my mental state. I almost started believing them. Then one day, an old friend reached out. She had moved to the beach, about a 40-minute drive away, and adopted a stray cat who turned out to be very pregnant. She was asking everyone she knew to take a kitten, and I was in the exact mental state to not be able to resist. The unplanned trip out of town was enough, but having a new kitten to take my mind off things felt like just what I needed. I didn't hesitate. I drove to the beach that night. At her house, I was so engrossed in the new kitten that I had forgotten about what was happening at home. But as I was loading the carrier into my car, I noticed it. I smelled it first. The foul secondhand smoke emanating nearby. The tan SUV and the old creep inside it. He had followed me all the way to the beach. In that moment, I chose to ignore it, knowing my friend would probably just call me crazy too. But internally, I was panicking. When I returned home, just got worse. I was trying not to think about it. I had to get my cats introduced to each other somehow, then figure out if there was anything I could do about him. Turns out, he moved first. About an hour after I got home, someone knocked on the door. I froze, terrified, not moving for at least a full minute. They didn't knock again. Hoping they were gone, I crept up to peek outside, but there was no need. Whoever was out there, they had slid a note under the door and left. As soon as I picked up the envelope, I smelled that cancer again. The paper was soaked in cigarette smoke. It had to be from the man in the tan SUV. The odor was the same as the one I'd come to recognize as his. Unfortunately, that was far from the worst part. It had to be from the man in the tan SUV. The note was handwritten. It said, "One pet per unit policy. Get rid of it." He knew I brought a second cat in, but what did he care? Then I looked at the signature he left. Under his name he wrote, "Your landlord." No. If he was my neighbor and my landlord, that meant he had a spare key to my door. This whole time, he could have entered my home whenever he pleased. I couldn't believe it. I had to pull up the digital copy of my lease to prove it. But sure enough, the name and signature matched. I had been paying that man rent so he could pay his bills while he stalked me full time. With this information, there was nothing I could do. I had to give the kitten back, as I was afraid of what he might do if I disobeyed him, or broke my lease to try and move somewhere else. He hadn't done anything yet, but that just meant I had nothing to use against him. And of course, he could change that fact whenever he wanted. It might sound crazy, but I lived like this for another 9 months, until my lease finally ended. I searched the condo for him every time I entered, to see if he was waiting for me, and I jammed the front door with chairs and rugs to keep him out when I was home. I was worried he would follow me to my next place, but for whatever reason, he didn't. I didn't understand why until recently. It's been 3 years since I moved out. I still look over my shoulder whenever I smell smoke because of him, but otherwise I've forgotten about it. By chance, I happened to be near my old condo complex. On a whim, I decided to drive by my old place. There it was, and judging by the stickers on the car parked out front, occupied by another young woman. And then there he was, standing across the street, passively watching. Except this time, he finally looked directly at me. As I drove by, we made eye contact, and I know for a fact he recognized me. Now I get it. I was never special. It was just his tenant. The temporary fixation. He wanted me to know that he was always there, that he always could do something. People like that eventually do whatever it is they're thinking about. But I made it out in time. I just hope the poor girl currently living there realizes how much danger she's in. The worst place I ever lived was in Tallahassee, Florida. I moved there to be near my girlfriend, who was going to FSU, which turned out to be the dumbest decision of my life. I struggled to find an apartment I could afford, and ended up on the outskirts of town, renting a roach-infested 2-bedroom townhome in the hopes of finding a roommate to move in and split the rent with me. Obviously, that never happened. The list of things that sucked about that apartment is long, but there was one part of it that I avoided completely: the back porch. I thought it would be a cool place to hang, but upon trying that the first time, I realized the damn thing was crawling with spiders. Screw that. Aside from the porch, also at the back of the first floor, was the tiny kitchen and laundry room. For whatever reason, the laundry room had a door separating it from the kitchen, as well as its own door leading outside to the back porch. So I had 2 different ways to access a space I didn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. Great. On another note, the washer and dryer didn't work, and the landlord refused to repair them. So I washed all my clothes at the laundromat down the road, and used the laundry room as extra pantry space. If all this wasn't bad enough, the neighborhood was home to a thriving community of other pest animals. Something was always digging through the garbage bins and scratching at the exterior walls, trying to take shelter. The sounds were more frequent after dark, and there seemed to be a preference for the back of the building. One day I got the nerve to go out on the back porch to see if I had something nesting underneath it. The building was on a grade, so while the front door was at ground level, the back porch was about 3 feet up off the ground. The crawl space underneath seemed to extend below the building as well, but I had no clue how far it went. When I looked at the other 2 units connected to mine, I saw that the underside of their porches were boarded up with plywood. It looked like shit, but it must have worked, because my crawl space was wide open, and something was living under there for sure. There was a patch of loose dirt by the steps where the grass had been killed by something repeatedly crawling in and out. I had no interest in doing a thorough investigation though. I just took a page out of my neighbor's book and decided to board it up. That afternoon, I went to the store, bought some trellis panels, then took a hammer and some nails and covered up every entrance into the crawl space via the back porch. It wouldn't stop rats or mice, but it looked a whole lot better than plywood, and it would repel the larger critters I suspected were the problem. However, the next morning, I discovered the animals were both bigger and smarter than I anticipated. I'd heard the usual scratching and scraping through the night, but nothing prepared me for what I walked out to. Something had entirely ripped one of the trellis panels off the porch, then smashed it to bits. That wasn't all either. After I picked up the pieces, I noticed damage to the secondary back door leading into the laundry room. There were scratch marks all over the lower half. I couldn't tell what made it, but it seemed related. Whatever was living under my porch, it had tried to get into my apartment. With that in mind, I decided to give up and just let them have the porch. Besides, I had other problems. I still couldn't find a roommate, so I was bleeding money for this shithole. And on top of that, my girlfriend and I were on the brink of breaking up. The whole reason I was suffering through living there was to be with her. But we barely spent any time together anymore. I felt like it was because the filth and squalor of my apartment was rubbing off on me. Around this time, with everything that was going on, I started drinking. A lot. I couldn't afford to go out most nights, so I would just buy bottles of bottom shelf vodka and drink myself to sleep every night after work. At some point, it got so bad I would black out halfway through the bottle, then wake up on the floor with the bottle completely empty and my entire apartment in a wreck. On a regular basis, I would find mysterious trash and broken glass everywhere, roaches crawling in the clothes I left on the floor because I randomly decided to strip naked while blacked out, and the exterior door in the laundry room unlocked. I was always too hungover to care much about why any of this was happening. I just tried my best to reset, clean up, and lock the door again. My best guess was, since I always avoided the back porch while sober, that drunk me made it a point to hang out there. This was my life for several months leading into the winter. Nobody wanted to hang out with the drunken asshole I'd become, and my girlfriend broke up with me, though I don't even remember that happening. I just know it happened at some point. One day, I drank myself broke. I had no money and no liquor, so I was having an involuntary dry night. Faced with the stark reality of my life, I was paralyzed. I lied in bed and stared at the ceiling for hours. Sometime around 3 a.m., I realized there was no use trying to sleep anymore, and I was starving, so I went downstairs to the kitchen. Nothing in the fridge or any of the cabinets was appealing to me. The last place I could look was the laundry room, which I stored some non-perishables in. When I opened the door and turned on the light, I saw a person sleeping on top of the washer and dryer. It was a homeless woman. She was using pillows and blankets of mine that went missing forever ago. I was in complete and utter shock, but it got worse. Under the bright lights, the woman woke up. She squirmed under the blankets and turned over, then looked at me. And with a slightly confused look on her face, but in an otherwise calm voice, she said, "Oh hey, you're up." I slammed the door in her face. I'd never seen her before in my life. Why was she talking to me like she knew me? And why the hell was she sleeping in my laundry room? Freaked the hell out, I grabbed my phone and my keys and locked myself inside my car. Then I called the police. It was so late and they clearly didn't care about the neighborhood. It was so late and they clearly didn't care about the neighborhood, so it took them forever to arrive. By then, the woman was gone. I asked the cop to look under the porch, but he simply shined his flashlight and found nothing, telling me he was not going to crawl in there either. That left me with only one option: leave, skip town, smoke bomb the whole city, break my lease, and go back home to my parents with my tail between my legs. I wasn't prepared to deal with this. The way that woman spoke to me made me connect a lot of details about the shit I constantly woke up to after blacking out. I think I had caught her before, but while so belligerent that I didn't chase her out. I was so lonely and wasted that I think I hung out with her. I have no idea the extent to which we interacted, but I hope she was just sneaking around me when she knew I was blind drunk, just whenever she needed to get out of the cold. I hope I didn't, you know. It's been a couple years since then, though I think about this time a lot. I was in a deep hole. My level of carelessness could have gotten me seriously hurt. It's taken a lot of work to claw my way up to where I am now. But I always wonder, what would have become of me if I stayed there? The cops wouldn't have helped me. My friends and girlfriend had every right to abandon me. That whole time I was looking for a roommate. I was too drunk to realize I already had one. She must have been living under my porch from the start. And through me, she found a way inside. Had I stuck around much longer, I think I would have become like her.
By the start of my junior year of high school, I think I had things dialed in. I was doing okay in all my classes, had plenty of friends, no real enemies, and made memories in pretty much every quarter of high school. So, when I saw a kid who seemed to be struggling a bit, I had the urge to help him out. I noticed him during the first week of school. I'd never seen him before, but it was like I was seeing him everywhere, always alone, off to the side looking lost. One day, during lunch, I went up and introduced myself. We talked for a bit and got to know each other. His name was Kyler. He was a senior who had to leave behind all of his friends from his previous school because his dad moved for work. To me, that sounded like a rough deal, especially so late in high school. I gave him my Snapchat and told him to reach out if he had any questions or needed help finding anything. Honestly, I was surprised when he texted me in my very next class, though not pleasantly surprised. That's when I started to get an off vibe. For some reason, Kyler's first question was to ask where I lived. He said that he just wanted to know if we lived near each other, so I tried to be nice and careful at the same time by just giving him the general neighborhood. That wasn't enough for him. He asked for the address, claiming he didn't know where anything was, as if he couldn't just look it up. I told him I'd tell him later, then I put my phone away for the rest of the period. In my pocket, I felt vibration after vibration from Kyler pestering me with endless messages. I couldn't read them, as I would probably get caught on my phone trying to do so. But it seemed like whatever class Kyler was in didn't care about phone use whatsoever. Later, during class change, I skimmed through the block of text. I was a little disturbed to see that he'd been asking to hang out right now, not after school, but to skip class with him. Even more concerning was where he wanted to hang out. The Diamond. It's what we call one of those older buildings on campus. It's kind of far from every other building, and it's very small, with just 10 or so classrooms. It's mostly just used for clubs and testing, so it's usually quiet and empty during the day. There's a square-shaped courtyard in the middle with a surprisingly nice garden, hence the name, Diamond. If this really was Kyler's first week here, there was no way he could have known about the Diamond already. Asking me to meet him there alone made me think he was up to something. I'd only met him like an hour ago, so I didn't feel bad about refusing and blocking him. If only it was that simple. Just like before, I kept seeing Kyler everywhere. Oddly, he wasn't scowling or angry because I was ignoring him. He had the same blank expression on his face, but now he wasn't shy about staring directly at me. Leaving school that day, I was happy to get away from Kyler, but on my drive home, my phone started blowing up again. A random Snapchat account added me and started flooding me with messages in the same cadence Kyler had, so I knew it was him. I blocked that account too, but over the course of the evening, Kyler kept creating new ones and spamming me until I blocked him. Each one was meaner than the last, calling me a flake and a coward, then sending me vague threats if I didn't respond. Only the threats didn't stay vague. As I glanced through some of the messages, he kept telling me he was going to find out where I live and punish me for flaking. I thought he was just bluffing, but then he did it. He sent me my own address. I couldn't block the account he sent it on. If he was going to do something, I needed whatever warning I could get. I finally responded, telling him to stop overreacting because I didn't hang out with him. He just replied that it wasn't about that anymore. I sat there, confused. Then I saw lights hitting my window, like someone flashing their high beams at the house. I looked outside and saw a car backed into the neighbor's driveway across the street. It was nighttime, but it didn't look like any of my neighbor's cars. Panicking, I rushed out the front door, hoping to keep this mess away from my family so I could handle it on my own. As soon as I stepped outside, the car started moving. It revved to full throttle, racing down the neighbor's driveway. It drove onto the street, still heading straight, then jumped the curb into the yard. For a moment, I froze, thinking it was about to crash straight into the house. It was going to hit me first, then plow through the front entrance, destroying everything. At the last second, the car took a sharp turn and fishtailed, tearing up the grass and spewing dirt everywhere. It careened back onto the street and sped off, tires screeching, engine still being pushed to its limit. When my parents heard the noise and came outside, they found me still standing on the porch, shaking, staring at the tire tracks arcing through the yard. I was too scared to even look at the tags on the car that made them, but I knew who was driving it. Kyler. That night, we called the police, who reported it to the school. The next day, I got called into the office. I expected to be confronted by Tyler, but he was nowhere to be found. Literally. The principal told me they looked for him, but there was nobody with that name or description at the school. He was never enrolled at all. The whole time, he was just posing as a student, spying on kids and collecting information. But for what possible reason? I don't know if I just fell into his trap, or if I was the target from the beginning. The only thing I'm sure of is that something bad would have happened to me if I had followed him to the diamond. In my sophomore year of high school, I had my first encounter with a stalker. On a boring Monday morning, I sat at my usual spot in second period. As the bell rang, I noticed my friend Ileana, who always sat next to me, was absent. And there was a kid I had never seen before standing awkwardly by the teacher's desk. Before beginning the day's lesson, the teacher made an announcement, introducing the boy as a new student who just transferred from a different school. His name is Wallace, or Wally for short. Since Ileana was absent, the teacher told him he could sit next to me. I wasn't happy about it, but I tried to be nice and introduce myself. His face lit up when I spoke to him, which made me think I was doing a good thing. In hindsight, I wish I had just ignored him. Almost immediately, Wally went from stiff and silent to not shutting the hell up. He kept talking to me during class, loud enough for everyone to hear, causing enough disruption that the teacher had to tell him to be quiet multiple times. He even followed me to my next class, but thankfully he wasn't in it. I complained about him to the girls in third period, though of course, nobody had heard of this kid yet, so they didn't understand how annoying he was. Come lunchtime, the friends I sat with saw everything. About 5 minutes after I got to my table, Wally showed up completely uninvited and plopped down right next to me, literally pushing one of my friends out of the way. I swear, we told him he was way out of line, but he took it as a joke, saying he had to sit with us because I was his best friend. He went on and on, about how we had talked all through second period, which is technically true, but not in the way he made it out to be. For the next 20 minutes, Wally talked over everyone, oversharing personal details, giving me creepy, unwanted compliments, and trying to make us laugh with unfunny jokes. By the end of lunch, all my friends understood that I had essentially been cursed. They walked with me to my next class, but Wally walked with us. I was half worried, half hoping that his attention might fall onto one of the other girls, but I had no such luck. Over the course of the day, in each class I entered, I silently begged that Wally wouldn't be in it. I was terrified that he'd be standing stupidly in front of everyone again, this time beaming at me like a wax figure come to life. But it seemed like we only shared one class. However, on my walk home, I discovered that I wouldn't just have to worry about him at school. I had traveled 1 or 2 blocks from the campus when suddenly I heard someone running up behind me. I turned around in fear that I was about to be trampled or stabbed or kidnapped. But then it was just Wally, which was not any better. Already drained, I asked him what he was doing. He claimed he was walking home in this direction too. Then he saw me and decided to catch up. I knew this was all a lie, as he had just transferred schools, which meant he probably didn't even live nearby. Sadly, I couldn't outrun him or knock him out, so I pretended he wasn't there and kept walking home. He was talking my damn ear off the whole time, but I just kept nodding and giving one-syllable answers. When I got in front of my house, I jumped off the sidewalk into a full sprint, racing across my lawn to get inside and lock the door before he could catch up. I knew it was no use saying goodbye or come back later. Like the stubborn creep he is, he came up to my door and knocked several times, asking me to come outside. Nobody else was home, so I stayed silent, hoping he could take one simple hint. Eventually, he left, but I knew I had made a mistake. I panicked and led him to my house. I was well aware he would be following me home every single day from then on out, but I didn't even have to wait that long. Later that night, I was laying in bed when I got a message on my phone. It was Wally. He found my social media accounts. But the worst part is, his message said, "Look outside." I kept thinking, no, this can't be happening. But I peeked out my window and saw him standing on the front lawn. He noticed me immediately, then sent a flurry of new messages telling me to join him. It was the middle of the night. I had to assume he'd been watching my house all day. His annoying antics had become a serious threat, and I wasn't that stupid. Instead, I got my dad and told him everything. He went out there and told Wally off. Then he said he'd be taking me to school the next day and talking with the principal. As a precaution, I set all my accounts to private and blocked Wally on everything. But I was certain I'd still see him in the morning. To my surprise, he wasn't there during second period. I later found out the school was taking my accusation very seriously. Apparently, Wally had a pattern of obsession, which had turned violent at his previous school. This was his last chance to go to a normal school before being sent to an alternative academy, a chance he blew on his first day simply because I made the mistake of being polite. I'm thankful to my dad for stepping in, but he must have put a hell of a lot of pressure on the school for them to take action as quickly as they did. That said, this experience still terrifies me. I know it was relatively brief, but if this is what it's like being stalked for just one day, I can't imagine what it does to someone to deal with this for months, even years. I should be careful what I say though, as this might not be over for sure. Pretty soon, Wally will be old enough to drive a car. He still knows where I live. There's nothing stopping him from coming back. I just finished my final year of high school. Out of all the bullying, failed tests, and creepy teachers, there's one encounter I know I will always think about when I look back at everything that went down in that place. It started on a Friday night in December. I wasn't usually there that late, but I was taking a practice midterm for one of my tougher classes at school. There were a handful of other students taking the practice exam that night, including a friend of mine. After the test, which took almost 2 hours, my friend and I hung around even later to talk with the teacher about a few things. We only chatted for 15 or 20 minutes, but we were the last to leave. Of course, after all that stress, my friend and I wanted to take advantage of the nice, big, empty campus and walk around. It was getting to be nighttime, the weather was finally nice, and we felt like the only two people still there. Our school had a football field and a baseball field, as well as some smaller buildings scattered around that area. But the best part was the lake. It wasn't very big, yet back in the day, the school's rowing team used to practice on it. A long time ago, the team moved to a different, larger lake farther away, but the old abandoned boathouse was still around, just a tiny, dilapidated building slowly rotting away on the lakeshore. Given that this was a small trek from the main school area, lots of kids would go there to skip class and get up to all sorts of stuff. My friend and I didn't have anywhere to be, so we decided to check it out. When we got there, we were disappointed to see the school had replaced the padlock on the door. It was always going back and forth between kids breaking in and the school putting on new, sturdier locks. However, that hadn't stopped people from using the spot to engage in their vices. They just hung out right outside. The ground was littered with garbage, cigarette butts, roaches, even condom wrappers, and yes, used ones too. Far from the most glamorous hideout, for sure. But my friend was getting a kick out of it, filming the mess of evidence to post on his Snapchat story. I found it less amusing and honestly kind of sad, so I looked away into the small plot of woods opposite the lake. With the last bit of light dying out, I didn't expect to see much. I was thinking to myself it was probably time to go home and get away from this degenerate cesspool, but in the middle of that thought, my eyes caught something. A figure. A person. For a moment, my heart jumped. It had to be a school staff member, which meant we'd been caught and we were about to get screwed over right before midterms and winter break. And yet, the figure didn't come out of the trees, shouting and trying to wave us down and scold us. They weren't dressed right for that either. They just stared back at me. Their hair was long, thin, and greasy, matching the rest of them, their eyes glinting over a subtle smile. Before I could speak, they raised their arm and waved, slowly and awkwardly, proving beyond a shadow of doubt that they were looking right at me. Finally, I glanced back and told my friend he had to look up from the ground. It was urgent. He had to see this person before they disappeared. But of course, by the time I finally got his attention, the figure was gone, and my friend didn't believe me. He thought I was still messing with him, trying to get a reaction to ruin his video. Still, I knew it was time to leave. As we left, I thought about what I could do. If I told the school what I saw, they'd know I was at the boathouse after school hours, and I'd get in trouble. So I figured maybe I should just keep quiet. Plus, with my friend constantly making fun of me for the person in the woods, I started to convince myself I somehow saw it incorrectly. It was dark, and I was tired. My eyes were playing tricks on me. All those lies. Months later, I thought I'd buried it, but then the slightest whisper made me think of it again. This time, it was the middle of the day. I'd gotten excused from my class to go to the bathroom, so the halls were empty, dead quiet, or at least they were, until I got where I was going. I stopped to get a drink from the water fountain between the boys' and girls' bathroom, when I heard a distinct sound on the girls' side. Someone was crying. They weren't alone. Another girl was with them, trying to get the crier to explain what was wrong. Then I heard the word, boathouse, and suddenly I was full on eavesdropping. Skipping the less than legal details, this girl had just been at the boathouse with her boyfriend, doing about what you'd expect, when they realized they were being spied on in the middle of it. A figure was watching them from the woods. They didn't know if it was a man or a woman, but it didn't make it any less of an invasion. I froze, realizing I had never imagined what I saw back in December. I wanted to relate to those girls, see if we could help each other catch that creep. But then, one of them came out of the bathroom and caught me eavesdropping. In an instant, I became the creep for listening in on them, probably looking like I was about to walk into the girls' bathroom, and I knew they would never want my help. The best thing I could do was apologize and walk away before that girl thought I was any more involved. After that, though, I felt terrible. Had I reported what I saw, maybe the girl who was crying wouldn't have been exposed. To put my conscience at rest, I decided to call an anonymous tip to the police that night, but I never found out if anyone was arrested. All I know is I avoided that entire side of campus like it was radioactive, and I'm sure as hell glad I don't go to that school anymore.